So hey everyone, just about a year ago, actually in October 2018, I, together with my friend Davron, was developing FUNDERHUNT. Essentially, it was a small business lending marketplace like many others, and we actually were doing very well. In just 4 months, we were actually funding $1 million in loans. In just 4 months, we did over 200K in actual revenue. Everything was awesome except for one core problem that I could completely despise. And the problem was that the small business loan interest is insanely high, especially in the subprime market. It actually can get up to on average is about 32%, but it can get up to 200% APR. And we need to understand why that happens. Actually, there are two core problems why that happens. The first one is, well, if you actually look at that 32% loan, 22% of it is actual the lender's credit, the actual interest on that, and 10% goes to the broker as a commission for finding the client. But the thing is that the whole brokers are actually kind of stuck in the Stone Age. They use paper statements, they actually use fax, and they make customers run to the notary. And they're, in general, kind of stuck in the Stone Age. So what happens is that every small business owner who happens to be in subprime market is effectively subsidizing the inefficiency of the market. That's why we had to do something about it. And that's how we got together with my friends and we created Richie Lending. Essentially, it's a small business lending marketplace that does three main things. It's fully automated, actively uses machine learning. Because of that, we were effectively able to eliminate the middleman that previously existed in the industry. And because of that, we can give loans on average about 10% cheaper than anywhere else, including lenders themselves. Let's see how it actually works. And for that, let's look at David. David actually our first customer. And he runs some sort of like a real estate startup. So David comes to our platform, he fills out the application and he connects his bank account. What we're able to do at that point, we essentially are able to analyze his transactions, find his deposits, and pre-qualify him for a loan. We pre-qualify the guy and we submit him to the lenders from our network that essentially have the highest possibility of funding him. We send his file to lenders, either through API for some lenders or through email for some other lenders. Essentially, their lenders are able to go directly to David's dashboard and upload his offers. And what David is able to do, he just kind of picks the best offer that he essentially finds suitable and picks it, and we are able to help him finalize the paperwork. How we do it? We do everything from essentially capturing the contracts, even signing them, and video notarizing them in some cases. So what happened to this situation with David is that he had no papers, no statements, no middleman. He didn't have to pay the finder's fee, and he didn't have to go through all this unnecessary spam calls. Essentially, he spent 2 hours to complete that loan, and he got it for 10% cheaper. If he actually went with any other broker for that loan that he actually got, a $500,000 loan, he would pay about $50K just in the finder's commission to broker without actually even knowing it. With us, he's actually able to pay a flat fee on $199, and we still make money on that. We launched in March 2019, and we all have about over 100 lenders so far on the platform, including everyone in the alternative market like Fundbox and Cabbage and OnDeck and all those guys. We've able to make about over 700 applications so far, and we funded about 60 loans. That's actually not a big market if you think about it. Subprime market just funded about $2 billion in loans, but it's been growing at 19% year over year, and essentially if you look at it, it's about $200 million being burned on fire in the finder's commission. But here's the thing. If the loan is at 32% APR, but if we are able, because of, well, essentially our technology and the finder's fee, lowered his effective interest rate to 22% APR, that loan becomes available for a larger audience. And that's what's essentially our opportunity here, that there are 30 million small business owners, so small businesses in the United States, and 80% of them do not qualify for a business bank loan. Essentially their FICO score is below 680. So $37 million small business loans are giving away in the country every year, and we essentially can capture all that market by just essentially lowering the interest rate for everyone. Well, why us, and why do we think that Richie Lending is essentially the best solution for it? Today, we spent 300 times less money to process an application than any other broker in the country. We actually do it 200 times faster. And that's how we make it 100 times cheaper. That's it.
Because you didn't go first last time.
Okay, I've gone first the other 2 times.
Well, you want me to go?
Yeah.
So help me pronounce your first name.
Ermac.
Ermac. Very nice job. One of the things that really jumps out was your enthusiasm. I like that. So your intent this morning was more of an introduction. It was it funding? You help me.
Essentially we were actually discussing it earlier. We do not have a clear ask. Like we essentially want to have some advice on business development because we're trying to grow, and the most important thing about it is to grow fast.
Yep.
And essentially also for Charlotte, I guess that'd be important. We also we figured that we need some supply side help. Why? Because people, like customers that actually tend to care about their interest rate, this is what we've kind of figured out over time, tend to have better credit score as well.
Right.
So it's kind of like it's really interesting. So what we started losing lots of customers to like very competitive, like essentially customers tend to be better than we thought they would be. And we started losing them to PayPal, and especially like last week we lost like 2 customers to PayPal because they're essentially PayPal is able to offer very low rates and to our customers. So we essentially were looking into help on the supply side. If someone is interested, if someone is in finance and can essentially like see if they would accept our leads at some point, that would be like the ask for us.
Great. Perfect. I liked your introductory story, right? You were starting out kind of in the direct lending business initially, right? You morphed that into saying, hey, I want to be in a marketplace model, and I've had a lot of experience with marketplace models going back honestly 30 years, and and one of my big questions is there anybody else doing kind of a marketplace model in small business, right? And again, given you're here in Charlotte, right? If LendingTree was here, right? Because they kind of created a little bit of that, marketplace model for mortgages, right? So I would love to have seen a little bit again around that competitive landscape around where do you fit.
I see.
Go ahead.
I can answer that as well. As LendingTree is actually, it's a really good example. LendingTree is a lead generating platform. We're more of like a brokerage, essentially, because we take over the whole paperwork side as well, and actually take care of the loan on the way. And that's how, like, if LendingTree is not able to essentially offer you discounts, because what happens is the LendingTree gets the lead generating fee for themselves, and we essentially do the paperwork and the brokerage, and that's how we can cut that 10%.
So the good news on the market, and I'm a still reforming economist. That's how I started my career, so I like marketplace models, and they're good and bad, right? They're good because they're big, as you talked about. You were able to talk about 30 million small businesses. 80% of them don't qualify for normal SBA type lending. So there's a reasonable market out there. But the issue, and I think you addressed this a moment ago when you were talking about you need some supply, right? You need the lenders to plug into the platform. That's the downside of a marketplace model, right? Simultaneously, you got to figure out and address both the demand and the supply side of the equation, right? So and when you're doing that, one of the things I would have liked to have seen is to address the demand side, right? And that's what marketplace model is doing. You're somehow driving traffic, and so you need to really talk a little bit about what your customer acquisition cost is to driving those customers onto that platform. And again, it did make an impression, right? When you look at the finder's fee, right? The broker commission in that market is huge, and what you're saying, that's a big opportunity to take that down by literally a huge order of magnitude. But again, I've got to offset that by what's the cost of generating that traffic onto the site. And then the other piece is, there are a lot of companies out there on the supply side. You mentioned Cabbage out of Atlanta, right? Good example. And that really begged the question in today's world. The big question I have is why a marketplace model as opposed to going to somebody like Cabbage or some of the other providers you mentioned in a direct model? So, and again, you don't necessarily need to address it now, but in terms of your pitch, I'd have liked to have seen that addressed. The other part here, and I'll go back, is I'd like to have seen a lot more in team. Right, so you talked about, again, how you started and who you started with. I would have liked to have seen probably a little bit more on team, because as I said, investors, particularly at this early stage, they're 90% of their decision, frankly, is going to be based on the team and their background and their perceived ability to actually deliver.
Yeah, I would just build on that. That was the first thing. It's who you are. Particularly, going into this market, all I know about you is your name, and so then I have to go on appearance and other things, it's like you seem like a smart kid to me, and which is great, for technology, but you made some pretty hefty claims up there, and so to be able to kind of back them up in 5 minutes, you've got to draw on who else, what's your background? 2 lines, just like, why would we go with you? And particularly, you're trying to attract both, people who need loans, which that would probably be easier, with this style of presentation, but, getting banks and financial organizations to go with you, it's like there's going to have to be some backup data. I realize you got 5 minutes, but just like overall, and just immediate impression. It's I just need to know a little bit more about the background of you and the other 2 names that literally that's all we have.
Oh, it makes sense.
Yeah, and build on what Daniel said. Just the other market, like. I thought I understood who your competitors were, and until then you said PayPal, and I was like, I didn't quite understand it. And part of that is probably my, I don't know a ton about the financial markets, but that threw me for a curve a little bit. I was like, why are you competing with PayPal?
Oh yeah, just to clarify on that part, PayPal actually offers small business loans, and they're just not our lender. So essentially, they do not work through marketplaces. And essentially they're able to, basically it's just a lender, and even our best lenders do not, like even Cabbage and like On Deck and all those big guys cannot compete with PayPal and rates and stuff.
Yeah, I just think, in a 5-minute presentation, obviously you can't go through a competitive matrix or whatever, but just sort of, this is who's out there, this is where we are. It's very powerful, the 100 times cheaper, it's like, it's going to get my attention. I think it would get anybody's attention. But just sort of a placement of where you are and where everybody else is.
Cool.
I was just going to make a comment. Somebody years ago told me, "Good, fast, and cheap, any 2," and your pitch closed with "Good, fast, and cheap, you do all 3." And so it raised a little bit of skepticism in my mind in terms of how you're able to pull that off. Because generally in markets, you can get 2. Good and fast, but it won't be cheap. It can be good and cheap, but it won't be fast. It can be fast and cheap, but it won't be any good. Right? So you're somehow pulling that off. I would just say there's probably a challenge in somebody's mind that's in your audience saying, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't cheap.
It was only cheap. It wasn't good. Just kidding. Make
Time for a couple more?
Yep.
Yeah, just for clarification, you mentioned that you can save 10% to the consumer who's taking the loan, and then I thought you made an interesting point later on. We were talking about the fee, which I assume they're paying over the loan's life, that $50,000, and you're going to charge $200. To me, the first math item is that's much more than 10%. So maybe just harmonizing those 2 for people so that they can understand. Maybe the savings is much more than 10%, or it wasn't.
Oh yeah. That actually makes sense, because it's not 10% on the actual APR 10%. It's a 10% on the loan amount. It's actually way more. So if it's a $200 or 200% APR loan, it's actually 40%. So that was safe.
I sell industrial equipment, and one of my customers this week purchased a piece of equipment from me, and he said, I asked him, where did you get your funding? And he said, my factoring company actually provided me with this funding, and it wasn't subprime. I think he probably was right on the border. He said his interest rate was about 10%, but he said he always pays it off early, so he doesn't care what interest rate is. I think that's probably what a lot of small businesses do. They don't care about the interest rate because they figure I'm going to pay this off fast, and this is just to bootstrap my business. So one thing I might suggest to you is if you're looking for a customer stream, to look at ways that you can plug into ways that people that touch those customers often, like factoring companies, which are about getting invoices paid faster. And also my other idea was, what if you could look at peer-to-peer lending as a source of funding for these small business loans? That's just an idea.
Good question. Yeah, quick question about the first part. Yeah, essentially that's how we cut. Going back to the customer acquisition cost, essentially we have kind of pressure on the customer acquisition cost because of drastically cutting the cost. But that's what we figured essentially, that the only way to essentially for us to be able to compete on the customer acquisition cost is to catch customers when they just initially think about getting involved. That's why our main channels where we get customers is essentially partnerships. And the other one is having plugins on Stripe, Shopify, and Square, on the POS systems. So essentially where the customers are. It's like if the merchant is essentially have his POS system, that's where we pop up. Because that's what's important. That's where the customer's first impression comes for the loan.
I've got one last sort of thing for you to think about. So one of the other things, again, subprime market, a lot of banks have been out of that business for a bit. So one of the things to think about is, are there are a couple of little banks around town, right? They are probably getting as you said, probably 80% of the customers that come in to the pointy buildings down the street here, and we got 3 of the top 6 now here, right? They're rejecting those loans, right? So they're actually turning down their customers, making them a little unhappy. Wouldn't you like a little bit of access to that flow of deal flow that they're turning away? Just something to think about.
So we found the best source of leads for us is those startup Silicon Valley kind of lending new companies now that they're popping up. And the idea is that they all trying to go for the prime customers. And once they decline, and we actually partner with one of the guys at QCF as well. So essentially getting their decline files is the biggest source of very qualified customers. So we actually that's a big part of it. We white labeled that kind of solution.
All right, Richie Lending, everybody.